Who's heard of compact computer? Okay. Karen was employee number 104. So she knows a thing or two about the testing industry. And she was there. She was one of the leaders in helping them grow, then one of the fastest growing companies in the industry. Took them to 1 billion in record time, was that it?
Yes.
And then
yes,
all the way to 15 billion. So she is someone that we respect very much in the industry. She's been, after she left Compaq, she became a consultant for the last 14 years and leads a lot of innovators in the industry. She helps guide them. So Karen is going to talk with everyone about no dumbing down, leading your organization to growth, whether it's a team or an organization. So I can't say enough wonderful things about Karen and how much you're going to benefit from this session. So sit back, engage, and all yours, Karen.
Thank you, Donna. Great. Well, first, thank you for coming to this session. I do know end of a long day, and I will do my best, since this is a workshop, to keep you engaged so that you have a really good end of day here. I was just so thrilled to be invited. So thank you, Donna and team, for having me here. Apparently there was a request for more leadership content, and that is what I do for a living. So I'm glad to be here and sharing this with you. But really I'm here because at the age of 25, really early in my 20s, I walked away from a really amazing job. And I did that because there were a group of people at this company I was working at, which was a Fortune 100 company at the time. I'd been there, I don't know, 3 or 4 years right out of college. I got a promotion every 6 months. I had a few people that I was managing, not very well, but I was managing them. And I noticed some people leaving this company I was at, and they were going down the street and starting something else. And we didn't know what it was, and they hadn't announced any product yet, but I kept noticing people that I admired and thought a lot of and that were really talented leaving the company and going down the street. So eventually I called to see what was going on, and I went. And I thought, well, I'm 25 years old. I have very little to lose here. I know I can get another job. Now, this was in the 80s, so it wasn't so common to have a startup down the street, so it was a little riskier than I thought. But it turned out that this company, which had no revenue, hadn't announced any products, had 100 employees, turned out to be Compact Computer. And we went on to we were the fastest growing company in American history at that time. We did $111 million in our first year. We were the fastest growing to $1 billion a couple years later. And I was the vice president of operating services. I did all the global physical infrastructure for them. And by the time I left, 14 years later, we were at about $15 billion and about 17,000 employees. So I have lived what you go through. And I have been really, the last 20 years when I've been doing consulting, I've been working with primarily tech companies focused on helping them grow. Because one of the things that I learned is that when companies try to grow, they invariably focus on the wrong things. And they create these misalignments between what goes on internally in terms of their strategy and their external strategies. And really that causes them to be unable to deliver on the promises they made to their customers. And so my work has been getting that alignment to happen internally, support the external growth, so that you really can sort of live into your potential as an organization and fulfill those promises. And one of the things I learned along the way, and I have learned a lot about what works and a lot about what doesn't work. Growth covers a lot of sins. I know most of you probably already know that. Or most of you have firms that are growing at a pretty fast pace now, right, this industry? But growth covers a lot of sins. But one of the things that I know about companies that are in hyper-growth mode is that it's not so much about the marketing, it's not so much about even the technology, that once you find that product market fit, it's all about execution. And the key to execution is about teams. And so we're going to talk today about a couple of areas. I'm sort of limited in my time here. I've got a countdown clock going on. But we're going to talk about a couple of areas out of the many things we could spend our time on that have to do with helping you lead your organization to growth, whether you are leading a team or you're a CEO leading a whole organization, because these These principles will apply in either situation. I've seen them happen in both places. So I got a call not too long ago from a CEO, a guy I hadn't worked with before. His SVP of development had come from I'd worked with, and he went over. And so the guy called me and he said, hey, look, we're growing and we have a lot of problems. And it's not that we're not growing. We've got triple-digit growth year over year, 2 or 3 years in a row now. He said, the problem is I'm a first-time CEO, and I've never experienced growth like this before. And I'm starting to see some cracks in my organization. I'm starting to see some places where the leadership team is not aligned. And I don't know going forward how many people I should hire, when I should hire them, what they should be doing, what I should be doing with my time. And all of these are questions, frankly, that I asked myself as I was going through that hyper-growth experience at Compaq. And those are the kinds of questions, right? How do we get our team to be most effective, and how do we lead our team so that we can get through the growth? So this hyper-growth is based on making your teams work. And this is billed as a workshop, and because of that, I'm going to ask you to do some work in here this afternoon. The first thing I want you to do is, because we're thinking about teams and the importance of teams, is just first to think about what's the worst team that you've ever been on. I know we've all been on some bad teams, at least most people have been on multiple bad teams, so what's like the worst team you were ever on? I see some laughing in the back, I see some grimacing over here, so I know people have been on some bad teams. So I want you to think about both what the team was, and I'm going to ask you to pair up with someone that's sitting near you. It'd be great if you pair up with someone you don't know, but just take a couple minutes and do these things. First, one of you tell just a couple minutes about what was this bad team that made it so bad and so memorable, and then have the other person do the same for you. And then just take a minute or so and see if you can tease out what were the core behaviors that made that team so bad and so memorable. And then I'm going to ask to have some of those called out in the room, and we'll look at sort of how those play into this concept of no dumbing down. So any questions about what I'm asking you to do? Yeah? All right, I'll give you 3 or 4 minutes to do this, so speak quickly, but pair up with someone that's near you, and if you have to have a trio, please do. Okay, if I could get your attention back at the front, please. If I could get your attention back at the front. I always love this part because there's so much energy around these bad teams, right? Yes. Can't stop. So much to talk about, yeah. So we don't have a lot of time. I'd love to hear just concisely from a few groups. If you could raise your hands, I'll call on you. Sort of a core, what these core bad behaviors were. What made it a bad team? What were the behaviors? Yes? Bad leadership and poor communication. Check. Thank you. Yes? Bullies. Sorry. Yes. Sadly, bullies.
Misaligned goals and priorities, maybe leadership out of alignment with the rest of the team.
Yeah, so misalignment, absolutely. Over here?
It was all work, no family, no personal life.
I was on a call about that this morning. Yes, all work, no families. Yes.
Working in silos.
Working in silos, right? Absolutely. Here?
No trust, blame game.
Lack of trust, a lot of blame.
Top-down mandates.
Top down. Back here?
Lack of accountability and ownership.
Lack of accountability, and one more over here.
Territorial.
Territorial, yeah. So we could go on, right? There is a list of really bad behaviors, and these behaviors occur over and over again. And these are the behaviors that I call dumbing down behaviors. And the reason is they dumb down the output of your organization, and that has a lot of really bad consequences. So let me sort of move in now to what is dumbing down and why should we care? Well, dumbing down is one of these things that we've all experienced. Clearly, we've all had these experiences in our organizations where we've gotten completely misaligned from what our intentions were, and we're not able to deliver what we hope to deliver when we begin to work with our teams. And I call this, it's really teamwork as usual. It's what happens in most organizations when you work on a team. And it often begins, right? We join a team, or our organization decides to move towards team-based behaviors, and there's some sort of an event, and we get t-shirts and hats and mugs, and we're exhorted to go forward and work on teams. And we leave thinking, oh yeah, this time maybe we can really get something done. This time it might be different. And so for a while, you might see sort of these flashes of brilliance that teams have the potential to do. But then sort of these old behaviors start to creep back in, some of the things you talked about. And it's office politics that show up. It's bullying. It's our goals are misaligned. Or maybe we have one person on the team or two people on the team who are just not able to perform at the level that everyone else is. And so here's a takeaway for you. A team is only able to perform at the level of its lowest performing member. It's like a weak link on the team, right? If you think about a chain. For me, I figured this out. I just took up rowing, and I thought about rowing, and I thought, wow, this is going to be arms and backs. I am going to be so buff, arms and backs. Well, it turns out that it does take some arms and backs to row, but it's a leg activity. And it doesn't matter how strong your arms and your back are. If you can't push with your legs, you are not going to be able to row, and your boat will flounder. And that's exactly what happens to a team. The stronger members of the team can carry the team for a while, and they will, especially if it's just one member. But if you have multiple members, or this goes on for a long time, your A players, they're going to look at that team like a tar pit, and they are not going to want to play on the team. And eventually, they'll make for the exits. And it doesn't have to be that way, right? We all know what a bad team is. We know what it looks like. We know what the behaviors are. We just don't always know how to get out of it and how to create sort of these high-performing and best-performing teams. So I'm going to just look briefly here at this list. I always ask people, tell me about your worst teams. And I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of teams over the years. And this is the list that I get. It's not dissimilar to what you told me, right? Mismatched skills, our resources are not the same. Sometimes we get groupthink, or we've fallen into cynicism. A lot of ego, a lot of defensiveness can come up. Weak leadership. I love this one called using the flywheel, because we see that particularly as companies get bigger. When you're a small company, you can see the impact of every action or inaction of every individual in the organization. If you don't show up at work, it matters. If you don't, if you take the afternoon off, it matters. But when you get big, you can get a flywheel, which I think is a bad thing, because the company gets going, and all you have to do is just put a little effort in to keep it going. And I think that's sort of the bane of what happens to, quote, grown-up companies. So these are the behaviors we see in worst teams. So what causes this? We know about it. We know that it happens. There's sort of three main causes for this. And the first is, it's really blind spots, right? Now, at Compaq, when we were a little company, everybody, as I said, could see the impact of their action. But as we grew, and we grew really fast, we were hiring hundreds more people every month than we forecast. So not just hundreds of people every month, but hundreds more than we forecast. So there was a lot of hiring going on that I will say was not highest and best. So we got a lot of people in the door. And when a company has 1,000 people or 5,000 people, people come to work differently for different reasons than they do when you have 10 people or 100 people. Right? People actually told me at one point they came because the benefits were really good. We didn't even have benefits, right, back in the day. No one came for the benefits. These people are not bad. They're not wrong. They just had a different motivation for being there. And that's the sort of thing you have to watch for, because it will dilute the passion in the organization for getting the thing done. And it happens slowly. You don't notice it when the first person comes in. It's not quite so passionate, but you do over time. And so it's sort of this blind spot. It's the frog in the pot of boiling water impact, right? So you have to watch for that blind spot. The second cause of dumbing down is what I call over-applied individualism. Now, I'm from Texas, so I get it about individualism. We're all about that in Texas. But when you have over-applied individualism, what happens is the individuals try to maximize for themselves rather than optimizing for the team. Now, that's not to say that anyone should ever have to dumb down. We want everybody to be able to work at potential and work at capacity, but they need to do that sort of as a team, right? Aligned, so that nobody is too far away from the whole. And I see this, I see it frequently actually in technology development groups. I was working with a group pretty early in my career. I got called in and they were missing their deadlines and there was a lot of infighting going on in this development team. And so we had an offsite to get started on dealing with this. And I'd been warned that one guy in particular was sort of the cause of the problems. But I started this, as I often do, with just asking people, what are your hopes and concerns about these couple of days we're going to spend here together? And this one guy was pretty cynical in all of his answers. So at the break, I went over and said, hi, my name's Karen. I'd love to spend a minute with you. And I noticed he had on this really interesting ring. So I asked him about it, and he said, oh, yeah. He said, this ring's my college ring, and he showed it to me. He was really proud of it. He said, you can see the buildings, and you can see the symbols, and he showed all that to me. And then I noticed it had an animal on it, a barnyard animal. And I won't tell you what the animal is because I don't want to give the school away. But he said, yeah, we get this our senior year. It faces towards us our senior year to sort of encourage us to move on. And then when we graduate, we turn it around so everything faces out. He said, and this animal, this unnamed animal, the reason we let it face out is so it will excrete on other people. And I thought, oh, yes, there is a problem here. I was shocked, and that doesn't happen to me very often. But he said, oh, yeah, this excretes on other people because they didn't go to my school and they're not as smart as we are. I said, okay. So I just filed that away, caught my breath, and we went back to work. So in these kinds of workshops where you're working on teams, often you do things that are experiential, and then you apply them to a business problem. So we moved into doing something experiential. And this guy, Mr. Ring, he stands in the middle of the room and he says, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this with this group of people. And I had my little moment of, well, how dare you waste our time? And then I thought, this is exactly what happens in the workplace. It's the old, wherever you go, there you are. So he was really technically brilliant, but he thought he was so brilliant he didn't have to play with anybody else. And we stopped, we debriefed what was going on. I had the team talk about this is how this impacts us at the office. And he sort of grudgingly went along with us for the rest of our time together. But then a couple of weeks later, back at the office, Mr. Ring got fired. And his boss told me, she said it just wasn't worth it anymore. He was really brilliant, but it was too much work. It was just, we were getting in our own way by having him on the team, and he wasn't willing to change. Because the skills that make us brilliant individual contributors, they are not the same thing as team skills. There's some overlap for sure, but they are not the same skills. We have to learn new skills to be able to work on a team. So over-applied individualism, watch for that. Now the third primary cause of dumbing down is sort of what I think of as a cultural constraint. Now this happens when the culture of the organization, well, let me just tell you a story, maybe that's the easiest way. I went to work for a company in Boston. A former client called me in. He said, I got here, we had this amazing technology, but the culture here is really a mess. Please, maybe, I don't know if you can diagnose it or help us. And so I got there, I met with the CEO, we'll call him John. We go in his office, he closes the door, and John starts telling me about his company. And I'm shocked. He says, he said, the people that work here are really awful. He said, it's a bunch of sad sacks coming in the door every morning. They're complaining about everything. Why does the sun have to rise in the east? They're like Eeyore and Winnie the Pooh. They were just really, really like, and then he said, so we have like this malaise, this gray monotone fog in the whole company. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. What am I not hearing? So I asked him, so what have you done about it? Right? This is your company. What have you done about it? This is your team. What have you done about it? And he said, oh, I tried a couple things. They didn't work. And so we've just been having this for a while now. And I thought, wow, so this is a lesson, right? And as he talked, he heard himself, and he said, in moments that all consultants live for, oh, this is my responsibility to fix this. And I thought, yes, it is. If you're a team lead, you're a team player, if you see the problem, it is your responsibility to fix it. And that, in fact, is one of the things we did at Compact. If you saw a problem, you owned it. And we wanted to see problems. It wasn't like, oh, I'm not going to look over there because I don't want to see that problem. We wanted to see them because we cared about the whole. We cared about making the whole thing better. So this idea of sort of cultural malaise is sort of the third area that causes dumbing down. So I would normally now ask you to think about the best teams that you've been on, but we're not going to do that because I only have a few minutes left. But I will show you this list of typical behaviors that are seen in best teams. And as you think about the best teams that you've been on, I suspect you will recognize some of these. So complementary skills, right? Conflict resolution that actually fits the situation, not one size fits all. That it's okay to color outside the lines. You don't just have to stay in your box. If you see things that need done in the white spaces, you do them. You have really effective leadership that gives you clarity and will resolve issues when it needs to happen. So there are all kinds of behaviors that create a best team. And you have to create, as a leader of a team or a leader of an organization, a culture that supports these kinds of behaviors. And I think about culture as seriously as just, it's the behaviors that you tolerate. It's not just what's on the wall, but when you have behaviors that you don't like and you don't do anything about them, they become part of your culture. So culture can be aspirational, but it really is, it's the behaviors that actually exist in your organization, both positive and negative. So I want to end this sort of short no dumbing down section by just saying no dumbing down is a cultural issue at its core, and that if you don't dumb down, neither will your team. So watch for dumbing down and take steps. Reward the behaviors that you want. Make sure your teams are chartered well. Do those things that allow your organization to live into the potential and work into the potential that is there for them. That's why they came to work for you. Nobody came to work thinking, oh yeah, this is going to be a great place for me to dumb down, right? So no dumbing down is sort of one of these internal strategies that will make a difference for your organization. There's another one that I want to make sure we have time to get to, and that's called creating time to think. Now this is in some ways a more individual strategy for you, but it's also something that's important for your team. So I'll quickly go through, this is called the Eisenhower box. Some of you may be familiar with it through Stephen Covey's work, but it's just looking at how do I decide what to do, right? We all have way too much to do. This looks at a grid of sort of urgent versus important, and we all know that we can spend time in all these boxes and that our goal is to spend time in things that are not urgent but important. And we often don't make time to be there. We spend almost all of our time over here on the urgent. And so you guys get these slides, and so you can sort of look at the detail here, but know that you're probably, I don't know you, but you're probably spending too much time on the urgent and not enough in urgent important. And that's where we do our best thinking work. And let me tell you, you were hired to think, right? I was just upstairs listening to the AI presentation. The people that aren't thinking are the people that will be replaced, as Wolfgang said, as we go down the road. And while you want to solve problems, you don't need to spend your day playing whack-a-mole, right? Does anybody remember the whack-a-mole game? It's a sort of a home game, and then there was a big arcade game you could play. And the way that works is there's a board with holes in it. You get a rubber mallet, and then these moles would pop up, one hole at a time, and you would hit the mole back into the hole, make it go away, another mole pops up, you hit it, and you win by getting all the moles back in the hole, which was not a particularly good use of time as we think about this game. But that's what most of us do when we go to work every day. We go from meeting to meeting, from problem to problem, hitting the moles on the head. And guess what? Those moles will not stop popping up. There is no winning that game. And if you don't create time for yourself and for your team to think, to sort of get above those problems and look at the long term and look at the big picture, you're not going to be successful. Your job is not just solving problems, it's making sure that you are solving the right problems. I'm going to tell you a really brief story about a friend of mine who solved this for himself in a way that I found pretty memorable. So his name is Mark Levy. Mark is a brand positioning consulting, and he's brilliant, and he has a lot of clients, and he could be on the phone talking with them 24-hour days if he chose to. But Mark stops work every day at 4:30. And so I asked Mark, why 4:30? And he said, well, because I go to the gym at 4:30. I thought, well, that's interesting, but why do you go to the gym at 4:30 every day? And Mark said, I go to the gym at 4:30 every day because it's easier than if I don't. He said, I used to go to the gym at 4:30 every day, and then I had clients who called me and said, hey, I'd like to talk at 5 or 5:30 or 6, and it's really important. And so I stopped going to the gym for this client. And then that one exception turned into 2, turned into 3, turned into 4, and then I found that I got sick. And I noticed when I got sick, and I never get sick, that I had gained a lot of weight. And I wasn't feeling sort of as sharp as I normally did. And why was that? It was because I wasn't going to the gym every day. And he realized that he was not going to the gym because people were calling him with important problems. He was trying to be nice and helpful. But he said, my aha moment was that everyone that calls me, all my clients are talking with me about important stuff. There is no shortage of important things that people are going to bring to me. And if I just take all this on, I will not be healthy, and I won't be able to help them in the way that I'd like to. So today, I go to the gym every day at 4:30. And Mark did that. He got his health back. He got his weight back down. And he's, sort of cruising along, being the amazing brand positioning consultant that he is. And I just thought that was so brilliant, because it's all from trying to be helpful to other people, right? But when you're over helpful, you can be a martyr. I have so many people that tell me, I get my work done nights, evenings, weekends, the occasional holiday, because I spend all my time in meetings. You can't do that. You have to create time to think, and I will say, no one else will ever create that time for you. An organization will always suck as much time out of you as they can get. There's no shortage of things to be done, but make sure that you know and that your team knows that you are working on the right things and that you've taken time to look at the bigger picture. Really important concept. I wanted to end with what I think is sort of a master key for growing your organization. So you've got a lot of good ideas about things that you could do that would help your team or help your organization. Hopefully you've heard some of those today, but you probably walked in here with some really good ideas as well. So I want you just to think about one thing that you could do differently that would make a big impact on your organization. Just one thing. And it should be something that you can do, that you could do with a fairly small step, but that would make a difference. Yeah? So if you think about that one thing, just sort of tuck it away for a minute. We're gonna come back to that. So one of the things that I've learned in working with hypergrowth companies is that it's all about teams. It's also all about process, right? How many times in the last 24 hours have you heard replicable and scalable? Well, those are code words for process, right? You have to have process in place. And in order to have process in place, in order to get things done, I think you have to have a really clear accountability structure in your organization. So if you want to get this good idea that you just had to actually happen, to make sure that your behaviors and your intentions align, then you really need 3 things, right? You need to understand the why. You have to make it personal so that you'll carry on. So when you say, oh, I'm not sure I really have time to do that, you'll come back to your why. You need to make it a habit. And you make it a habit by putting things on your calendar and making them recurring and debriefing them and making sure they're moving you in the direction that you want. And the third thing you need, I believe, is to have some mutual accountability in the organization. And so what does that mean? Well, I created this chart which we look at sort of holding yourself accountable and having other people hold you accountable. And if you go to the bottom left where it says flounder, there's like no accountability. Well, the odds of getting something done with no accountability is 0 or less, right? You never like have, oh, I think I'll get something done today because I don't have anything else to do. But if you look at the other people holding you accountable, that's in low personal accountability, that's kind of the fearful spot. And I use that because there are things we have to get done that we don't really want to do, but other people need them done. For me, when I look at this, I think about getting my taxes done, right? I am fearful of the IRS, and so I do my taxes, although that's not something I would naturally come to, but I am fearful about that. If you think about this fragile place where you have self-accountability but no team accountability, no other accountability, that's a pretty good place for getting things done. The people in this room are successful or you wouldn't be here. And so you're probably pretty good at holding yourself accountable and getting things done. But we also know that when it's just you holding yourself accountable, you are vulnerable to distraction. You are vulnerable to shiny new objects that come along. You are vulnerable to lots of competing priorities. And so if it's just you holding yourself accountable, the odds of that thing getting done are more fragile than they need to do. But if you can create a place where both you and your team are holding each other mutually accountable, then the odds of getting something done are huge. And so this is the way. When you put a process in place, when you have an intention, when you want to change a behavior, make sure it's more than just you that is holding you accountable, that your team is helping you do that. Truly important. Yeah. So I want you to take your good idea now, that thing that you want to have done differently that will make a difference to your team and your organization, and I want you to partner up with somebody you didn't partner up with before. And just take a couple of minutes, say what your idea is, say how you're going to hold yourself accountable, how you're going to get your team to help you with that, and get some feedback from them. You know, this is a safe place. You don't know each other. You won't have to see each other again if you don't want. But get some feedback from them about how to make that even stronger than what you've thought about, and then reverse those roles. And I'll give you a couple of minutes each to do that, and then I want to hear a couple of those. We'll do a quick close, and then I hope we have time for some Q&A. All right, so find a partner and talk about what it is you're going to do and how you're going to hold yourself accountable for it. So there's a lot more we could do here. Obviously, we're limited on our time to just a few more minutes. I just want to close by saying that accountability is like the master key to supporting your growth. And if you want to make change happen, actually scalable and repeatable in your organization, just don't let your success be dependent on something as fragile as individual accountability, right? So really pay attention to that. So again, today we've been talking about No Dumbing Down, which is a book that I released last fall. There are many different strategies. We've just touched on 3 of them today. But you can't have an organization that will scale and grow the way that you want it to if it is dependent on weak links, if it is dependent on people playing whack-a-mole, and if it doesn't have an accountability system. And so what you do want is your organization to have high expectations, right, of what's possible, to have high-performing teams that are able to fulfill those expectations. And you have to have time to think, and you have to have a culture of accountability. And if you simply have those 4 things in place, it will make a huge difference in your ability to be successful. So I'm Karen Walker. I want to thank you so much for your time today. And I think we have a few minutes left for Q&A if anybody has any questions. Yeah? I answered all the questions. Okay, great. Yes, please. Oh, virtual teams, yeah. So what happens with a virtual team, you take all the problems of a team and you multiply them. It's huge. I'll be with you next. I've done quite a bit of work with virtual teams. In fact, my original team was a virtual team. We didn't have all the tools we have today. So actually, are you on LinkedIn or Twitter? Yeah, so I just put a short video out about how to work with global virtual teams. It's 3 minutes long or something. That's got some tips in it, and I think you'll find that helpful.
Thank you.
Great. Yep. Back here.
So you talked about the overapplied individualism.
Yes.
The example of the fellow with the ring.
Yeah.
So how do you?
I'm not going to tell you what school. Okay.
How do you gauge or know at one point you've got to cut somebody loose because as a leader,
Yep.
as a manager, you want to grow people, you want your whole team to grow together, and so a
Yep.
lot of your efforts go into that.
Sure.
At what point do you cut your losses and say, I got to let this person go?
Yeah, and of course, there's no one right answer there, but I will tell you that the one thing that senior leaders have told me over the year, if I say look back and tell me what you would have done differently in your career, the first thing they always say is, I would have let people go sooner. We try, we really try, and we do it from a good place when we've got somebody on a team to try to make them fit. And sometimes we do it because it's we think it's in our best self-interest to keep them productive, and we think it's in their best self-interest because we don't want to let them go and then they've been fired and all of that. And I think the truth is, if somebody is not a good fit, they know it, the team knows it, and they're generally better off and happier when they find a better fit team. Now be careful, don't let someone go just because they're different, right? Because diversity on a team in any of its forms, including diversity of thought, is really important. But they have to come from a place of motivation of wanting to work with the team. And if you really want the benefits of team and you have someone who only wants to be an individual contributor, you can't keep them as a team member. You need to make them an individual contributor or they have to go. Okay, thank you, good question. Someone else? Okay, I am at 0-0. So thank you very much, I really appreciate it, thanks.
Thank you, Karen.
Yep.